And so the latest on the war in Ukraine. Now, Russia says that peace talks have not progressed enough for a leaders' meeting and that Moscow's position on the status of Crimea and the Donbas region remains unchanged. The two sides have held periodic talks since Russia launched its invasion on February the 24th, but there's been no breakthrough and they remain far apart on the question of territory.
Let's talk to Major General Tim Cross, retired British Army officer who joins us now. Good to see you this morning. Look, this in and of itself can come as no surprise.
No, not at all. I've never, to be honest, I've never really thought these talks would go very far whilst the fighting is going on in the way that it is. The Russians have when we look at these campaigns, we need to look at it in the context of three levels, if you like. Strategic level, what is Russia trying to achieve at the end of all of this? Now, some people say it's the whole of Ukraine, some people argue it's East Ukraine, but I don't think that's particularly clear. Then at the operational level, which the Russians are very good at, actually, historically, particularly in World War II, then how do you achieve that strategic intent? And I think for the Russians that was initially and still remains securing the eastern provinces, securing the Donbass, securing the line through to Crimea and probably up to and including Odessa. And then the third level is the tactical level. And that tactical level has gone badly wrong. And as part of that operation objective, and probably part of the strategic objective, was in military parlance we call the centre of gravity of Ukraine, which would have been the capital, and I think taking out the president probably. That hasn't worked. So they're now revamping themselves, redeploying to go back to what I think is that operational level, campaign intent, which is to secure the East. Now, for me, they've never been serious about coming to some sort of peace talks. They just want to keep those lines of communication open and psychologically put pressure on Ukraine and on the president to say, we're going to keep doing this until you agree to some of the conditions that we're putting on the table.
And yeah, that means it could go on forever. But in the meantime, I mean, as a soldier yourself, are you shocked and surprised by the mess they're leaving behind? And I mean in terms of human life, the awful pictures that have come out in the last 24 hours showing what look like civilians who have been shot, murdered on the streets. Does that shock or surprise you, or was it something that was going to inevitably happen?
I think, sadly, it's inevitable. I mean, we've rather become immune to serious war fighting in the West. I mean, we've seen elements of it, obviously, in Iraq and Afghanistan and so on. But any war is, inevitably chaos, uncertainty, and death and destruction. That's the bottom line. And therefore, to be honest, I'm not shocked. I think this war will continue for quite a while yet. Whether it deteriorates, in inverted commas, into a counterinsurgency campaign, as it's been in the East, really, for the last 8 years, or whether it develops into something more than that, more open war fighting, I don't know. But the Russians, I think, will try and envelop the Ukrainians in the east. And I'm afraid when you're into this long-range artillery, air attack, cruise missiles, etc., the inevitability is an awful lot of people get hurt. And that's the reality. That's the reality of war in Syria. It's been the reality of war, obviously, in World War II, places like Korea, and so on. We just tend to forget that. And we in the West have been pretty immune from all of this for quite a long time now.
Yes, I mean, the other big issue is rules of engagement, isn't it? I mean, Obviously, Russia's rules of engagement are not the same as ours.
No, they're not. I mean, any military organisation involved in a campaign like this, things will go wrong. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all flawed human beings. I often say the British Army is deeply flawed because it's made up of people like me. But the intent of the British Army is always to comply with the laws of armed conflict, the Geneva Conventions, the rules of engagement, and so on. And we spend a lot of time looking at those, and people literally carry in their pockets, places like Northern Ireland and elsewhere, what are the rules of engagement? What can you and can you not do? I'm afraid the Russians are not interested in that sort of thing. They're just only interested in causing as much mayhem as they can in order to try and bring Ukraine to the negotiating table and give up territory. Now, I have to say, it is not all that the Russians are bad and the Ukrainians are good. I mean, that's inevitably the way the media portrays it. But sadly, the Ukrainian military will be doing, bad things too. But that's the nature of warfare, and I'm afraid that's what we're going to see coming out of this, in the weeks and months ahead.
To those of us who are looking at these pictures and utterly bewildered by how one human being can do it to another, shooting civilians with their hands tied behind their back in the street and booby-trapping dead bodies, is that something the ordinary soldiers just decide to do, or do those orders come from the top?
Well, they'll be part of, in Russia's case, I mean, it's the way they operate. Look, when Zhukov, for example, commanded the Russians in World War II, and they took Berlin, their view was that you just put masses of people in and you cause as much destruction as you can. I mean, the Russians lost in the last, in taking Berlin, more people killed than we lost in the whole of World War II. And their training and the way they operate is what you're referring to. Now, I have to say that in Northern Ireland in the 70s, places were booby-trapped in all sorts of different ways and so on. And it's in that sense, it's not unusual. But I'm afraid that I've watched the mass graves being dug up. I've seen what people do to each other in places like Northern Ireland, in Iraq, in the Balkans, in the ethnic cleansing. My brigade built and ran refugee camp in Kosovo. So for me, and this being a Sunday, words like sin and evil are not interesting theological words. They're a reality of a broken and flawed world, a brutal world, and these sort of operations and these sort of campaigns just bring that out in spades.
It's a fascinating point, I think. Major General, as always, it's good to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my goodness. On a Sunday to hear those words like that.
Well, yeah. But doesn't that sum it up, though?
Yeah.
Especially from that military perspective as well.
I remember when we had the war in the Balkans, and you think back, it's the first time war is something we'd only ever talked about as something that happened in the past. And suddenly we were in the middle of something that was happening on our doorstep. And here it is again. And we don't seem to learn anything, do we? We don't learn how to be human to each other.
No. There's always somebody new coming up with some
awful
wicked idea.
Yeah.